Welcome to Weekly News Highlights, where we wrap up a week with a glimpse back into what went on in the past week. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. Let's first look back by using keywords. First off, North Korea. The regime may be getting closer to launching further military provocations to mark big events coming up in February. Cold chill on economy. It's no exaggeration to say everything is on a rise except for salaries here in South Korea. That includes the price of vegetables and even basic taxi fares in Seoul. Next, COVID-19. South Korea enjoyed its very first week without an indoor mask mandate after over 2 years. Now, last but not least, Kchip crisis. The backbone of the country's economy, semiconductors are struggling to make it overseas. We are now into February, which can be quite an eventful month for North Korea after enjoying a rather calm January. The North fired a short-range ballistic missile on New Year's Day, and there haven't been any more provocations of that kind since then. But February may be a different story. This coming Wednesday marks the 75th founding anniversary of the Korean People's Army in the North, which means a large-scale military parade is highly likely to take place to commemorate the occasion. Multiple satellite images speak for themselves, with thousands of soldiers in formation at the main training area in Pyongyang. The regime could use the upcoming military parade to show off its newest medium and longer-range ballistic missiles, as well as new drones. And that's not it. February 16th is the birthday of former leader Kim Jong-un. For one of the regime's biggest holidays, the North could fire a projectile using a solid fuel engine, which it reportedly tested earlier this week. This satellite imagery shows an engine test site in South Hamgyongdo province with a scorched area next to a test stand. Experts point out that the scorched area of about 120 meters indicates powerful flames erupted at the site. While these provocation-related concerns linger, South Korea and the U.S. have refreshed their commitment to extended deterrence and held tabletop exercises to simulate scenarios of potential North Korean nuclear attacks.
Seoul and Washington will expand and bolster their combined military capabilities, leaving no stone unturned in deterring North Korea's growing threats to regional stability. That's according to the South Korean and US defense ministers following their high-level talks on Tuesday. In a joint press conference at Seoul's defense ministry, the two officials reaffirmed their commitment to the US extended deterrence, which guarantees that Washington will defend its ally from both conventional and nuclear attacks. First, they confirmed the two sides will hold tabletop exercises, or TTX, in February, which simulate scenarios of North Korea's nuclear attacks. TTX were held annually from 2011, but have only taken place twice during the last 6 years.
In order to realize peace and stability, we've agreed to elevate the level and scale of combined exercises and training. We will further reinforce the alliance's capabilities and posture by holding expanded field training exercises and combined live-fire exercises.
Amid growing debate regarding the viability of the extended deterrence policy against North Korea's growing nuclear and missile capabilities, the two defense ministers agreed to enhance combined capabilities, along with information sharing, joint planning and execution, and consultation mechanisms to respond to crises. They aim to complete a tailored deterrence strategy before their security consultative meeting this year, which would create a strategic and realistic framework focusing on specific threats. The two officials also agreed to hold Defense Trilateral Talks, or DTT, with Tokyo as soon as possible to strengthen cooperation on regional security, following up on their three-way agreement reached last November on sharing real-time information on North Korea's missiles.
And let me underscore our mutual belief that trilateral cooperation with Japan enhances all of our security. We held high-level dialogues, and we deployed assets including F-22s, F-35s, and the Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group.
Going forward, marking 70 years of security ties, Seoul and Washington will continue to upgrade and tighten their alliance with deployments that advance assets to the Korean Peninsula and closer consultation between the two leaderships, turning extended deterrence assurances into action. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
On Wednesday, the two allies also carried out their first combined air training exercises of the year as a show of force against the North's threat to regional security. Seoul's F-35A fighters, U.S. B-1B strategic bombers, along with F-22 and F-35B fighter jets took to the sky off South Korea's west coast. Washington said the drill showed its strong will to beef up its extended deterrence and the two allies' determination to keep South Koreans safe from any provocation from Pyongyang. But the North snapped back just a day after the drill, warning of a tougher reaction to the Seoul-Washington military exercises. The North's Foreign Ministry cited Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin's pledge to deploy more American strategic assets to the Korean Peninsula made during his recent visit to Seoul earlier this week. The North once again lashed out that it has no interest in engaging in dialogue, but Washington once again stressed talks are available whenever, wherever. In the meantime, to better respond to the North's nuclear and missile development, South Korea is continuing to work on its powerful conventional missile, the Hyunmoo-5. On the local front now, last week we looked at the soaring heating bills here in the country, mainly due to the rising gas prices due to a global energy crisis sparked by the Ukraine crisis. We all knew it was coming, but many people, including myself, were shocked to see the January bill because it was much higher than what we've seen in previous years. Let's take a look at what happened and what was done to help.
Many people in South Korea are having to deal with heavy heating costs this winter. Compared to the same period a year earlier, costs surged more than 50% in December. Data released by Korea Real Estate Board on Wednesday shows that the average cost of heating an apartment came to 516 won per square meter, or around 40 US cents. That's up from 334 won or 20 cents for the same month the year before. Apartments in Sejong City had the highest average heating costs in the country, followed by Gyeonggi-do Province, Seoul, and the Incheon City.
I'm spending more than $280 for my monthly housing fee, and the heating cost accounts for around $55, so it's affecting my spending plans.
Now the real problem are the bills that are set to arrive this month. That's because demand for heating rose last month compared to December, as there were more cold days in January. On top of that, the average electricity cost in apartments also rose 16.2% on year in December, further increasing the burden. Considering the difficulties that low-income families could face amid the soaring heating costs, the government has announced plans to expand financial subsidies for people experiencing hardship. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said Wednesday it will provide aid not only to people who receive basic livelihood security program benefits, but also to those whose earnings are below 50% of the median income. The package includes an energy voucher worth around $240 as well as $220 discount on gas prices. Around 1.6 million households will be eligible to receive this benefit until the end of March. And the ministry says it's also aiming to improve the Social Security information system to make registering for these programs more convenient. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
But the financial burden has not been lifted completely. The situation at grocery stores is also worrying for many. Food prices, particularly the price of vegetables, have gone up. This is the data released by South Korea's Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs on Wednesday. The price of onions has jumped 33% this month compared to a year ago. Prices for spring onion and cucumber have risen over 10%. In fact, the hike for cucumbers has reached nearly 20%.
The prices were generally high in January because of increased demand during the Lunar New Year holidays. But even after the holidays, the cold wave and less sunlight led to a decrease in production.
Shelf-stable goods, snacks, as well as the franchise bakeries were all affected by price rises. The food companies pointed to the rising cost of ingredients as well as the labor costs. Making matters worse, the base taxi fare in Seoul rose to 4,800 won on Wednesday. Now that's up 1,000 won, or roughly 80 cents. This is the first fare increase since February 2019. On top of the high interest rates, skyrocketing heating bills, and more expensive living costs, the news has not been welcome for locals.
편의점만 가도 평소보다 더 많이 나오는 것 같고 일단 교통비도 그냥 1,000원 오른 것 자체가 좀 크게 다가오는 것 같아요.
Some citizens point out that the fare rise should come with an improvement in taxi services.
몰랐는데 사실 저는 이제 20대, 30대들은 그 물가가 오른 거에 비해서 서비스가 그만큼 어느 정도 품질을 받쳐주면 내도 괜찮다고 생각을.
To taxi drivers, the rise in fare is inevitable because of a rise in the price of fuel, but they also say
요금도 많이 올랐고 물가 상승도 많이 했기 때문에 요금은 올려야 되지만 당분간 손님이 좀 줄어들 것이라고 저는 생각이 드는데요. 점점 나아지겠죠.
high inflation is expected to be a hot potato here in Seoul for a while, with bus and subway fares set to go up in April as well. Now, that will be the first raise after an 8-year freeze. Now, let's turn our attention to COVID-19. The coronavirus is holding on to its status as a global health emergency. The WHO will keep the alarming label for at least 3 more months, but the world is phasing out of the pandemic, it says. Our Lee Seung-jae with the details.
After almost 3 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Organization Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said Monday that COVID-19 remains a global health emergency.
The committee has advised me that, in its view, COVID-19 remains a global health emergency, and I agree. As we enter the 4th year of the pandemic, there is no doubt we're in a far better situation now than we were a year ago, when the Omicron wave was at its peak.
The comments came as a WHO's emergency committee met last Friday and advised Tedros that the virus remains a public health emergency of international concern, the UN agency's highest alert level. The decision also comes as the U.S. earlier this month extended its public health emergency until April. The WHO chief also noted that the world is in a far better place than it was a year ago when the Omicron variant first swept the globe, adding that at least 90% of the world's population has some level of immunity to COVID-19 due to vaccination or infection. However, he stressed the need for continued vigilance as the latest reports show that the numbers still remain a concern globally.
But since the beginning of December, weekly reported deaths have been rising. In the past 8 weeks, more than 170,000 people have lost their lives to COVID-19. And that's just the reported deaths. We know the actual number is much higher.
Dr. Tedros last month said he was hopeful that the world will transition out of the emergency phase of the pandemic this year, which would mean hospitalizations and deaths have dropped to the lowest possible level, and health systems are able to manage COVID-19 in an integrated and sustainable way. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The pandemic is not over, according to the WHO, but South Korea took a step closer to a full return to life by lifting the indoor mask mandate starting Monday. Our Kim Jong-sil, who has been following the story since day one, is here in the studio with us. Welcome, Jong-sil.
Thanks for having me, Dami.
All right. As I've just mentioned, you've been following on the indoor mask mandate lifting. Now, walk us through the past week.
Of course, Dami. Well, on the first day on Monday, I went to a high school in Gangnam that was restarting again after winter break. And because it was very cold and being only the first day, the majority of the students, almost 90% in fact, were wearing masks when they arrived. And after chatting a bit inside the classrooms without the mask, some of the students that were, all of the students actually put them back on when the class began.
I'm sure the scenes were quite refreshing to look at, right? And also, then what did they have to say about wearing the masks when inside?
Well, the students that I talked to told me that they are in their second year, and for the entire duration of their high school years, they had to put the mask on. So they actually don't mind using it because they are so used to it. And they're also the part of the group that took classes online and had no field trips of any kind for the last few years.
After visiting the high school, you also went to a subway station. How was the scene over there?
Right. I went to Sarang Station, line number 4, and as you may know, it is one of the busiest stations during rush hour here in Seoul, and almost everyone was wearing masks on the platform and on the subway train itself because wearing one is still required on public transport.
Right. I do understand the hassle because putting it on and off can be quite hectic, right?
Absolutely.
Then can you tell us about how people have adapted to the new change during the rest of the week?
Well, Tammy, I want to say that I talked to lots of different people working at different types of businesses, department stores, banks, and movie theaters. They all told me that there's definitely an increase in the number of people showing up without masks on, but the number is still very small compared to people who have them on. The majority of the people I found this week on the streets, in stores, in stores or even outside still had their masks on.
Right. I myself have felt like I have to keep the mask on. Now, let's talk more about that. There was an article from New York Times this past week that there are some of the reasons why Koreans are not taking their masks off. And I have this interview here from Kim Sang-min. He's a scholar based here in Seoul, who said masks have relieved many South Koreans of the societal pressure to maintain a level of facial beauty. Now, this has been picked up some local media outlets here in the country. What did you think of what he said?
Right, Dami. Well, obviously, I haven't talked to the scholar myself, so I don't know the full extent of the context or what research his comments were based on. But there's definitely some gap between what he said and many of the opinions I heard throughout the week. Take a listen to this nice couple I met at the theater.
The pandemic isn't completely over, so I still wear them in certain places. It's still questionable whether or not wearing masks is okay at this point. I know people in South Korea waited for this day to come, but COVID-19 is still out there, so I have my worries.
I went to the gym without my mask on, but everyone else had their masks on, so I felt as if I was naked.
I see. Then, according to your findings throughout the week, what are some of the other reasons as to why South Koreans are keeping their masks on?
Right. People gave me 3 main reasons. First, there's still some underlying anxiety about COVID-19, and masks can help prevent not just COVID, but also other airborne viruses in the winter. Second, the fact that the government is still recommending their use. Third, because it's just not that uncomfortable anymore. Take a listen to what some students from Indonesia I met in Gangnam had to say.
Actually, I feel kind of another new normal because we have been using masks for like 2 years plus. So now that we are okay to not wearing it, we still have to like get used with it. So
I think that because I used to use it, so and it's comfortable to use the mask in the public area, especially we still have like some case of corona right now.
And as the New York Times also pointed out, the fine dust problem in South Korea cannot go unnoticed. From 2020, the fine dust level in the country kept hitting new unwanted records, so people started to wear masks to protect themselves from that. There were also issues with SARS in 2002 and MERS in 2015, and other respiratory viruses in South Korea that made people more aware of the importance of mask wearing.
I see. I am one of those people keeping multiple masks in our handbags, just in case when it gets too dusty out. And now moving on to some professionals, what are medical experts saying about this lifting?
Well, Tami, Professor Kimuju, one of South Korea's renowned medical experts in infectious diseases, said this. Take a listen.
I think this sort of discussion regarding indoor masks being mandatory or eased to being recommended, all this talk is making people very tired at this point. The health authorities should leave it to the people voluntarily and instead focus on getting the vaccination rate to increase and improve the indoor ventilation system. The government should encourage people to make wise decisions by themselves by communicating actively and remind people that washing their hands and wearing masks are still acceptable measures to prevent COVID-19.
So there we have it. Even as the mandate has been lifted, it's still important for us to take personal quarantine measures.
Right. No mask or mandatory mask. It's good to stay healthy, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much for your thorough report and also giving us a lot to think about.
My pleasure, Tami.
Now, staying with the coronavirus situation, let's go back to Wednesday. China slapped a mandatory PCR test on all inbound travelers from South Korea, which was seen as a retaliation for Seoul's decision to extend visa issuance restrictions for visitors from China. But Beijing imposed a measure only on foreign travelers from South Korea, exempting Chinese travelers. Now, Seoul's foreign ministry pointed out that such a policy should not exist for non-quarantine related purposes. Seoul and Beijing are reportedly staying in touch for related discussions on the matter.
China abolished antivirus measures, including PCR testing for inbound travelers in early January, but there has been a policy U-turn for those arriving from South Korea. Starting Wednesday, all travelers coming from South Korea have to take a PCR test upon arrival. Anyone who tests positive will be isolated or quarantined at home or at a designated facility.
Regrettably, some countries still insist on adopting discriminatory entry restrictions against China. China firmly opposes this and has a reason to take necessary reciprocal measures.
Beijing's latest tit-for-tat move appears to be in retaliation for a decision by Seoul to continue its recently implemented policy to stop issuing visas for Chinese travelers wishing to come to Korea. The South Korean government announced last week that the visa restrictions, which were supposed to last until the end of January, would be extended for another month. However, Seoul has also said the measure could be lifted depending on the virus situation.
We will review whether we can lift the visa restrictions earlier, even before February 28th.
The quarrel between South Korea and China began in January as China decided to suspend its short-term visa services for South Koreans in retaliation for strengthened antivirus measures put in place by Seoul for inbound travelers from China as COVID-19 cases surged there. Although the short-term visa restrictions for South Koreans are still in place, Japan, which had been subject to similar retaliatory measures from China, saw visa issuance resume earlier this week. Seoul's foreign ministry official has reiterated that entry restrictions should never be based on factors other than to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Choi Min-jang, Arirang News.
Last but not least, the Kchip crisis. South Korea saw a record trade deficit in the first month of the new year, mainly because of a big drop in semiconductor exports. This came as a huge shock for the country, as the semiconductor exports have been long described as the backbone of the country's economy. Our economics correspondent Shin Ha-young explains further.
South Korea is still struggling with sluggish exports, posting a record high annual trade deficit last year and the highest monthly deficit last month. To address the issue, Finance Minister Chu Kyung-woo on Friday discussed the economy with other senior officials.
South Korea's economic conditions, including exports and investment, are expected to be tough at least until the first half of this year. The government will make all-out efforts to support our company's exports and investments to revitalize the economy and bring about a faster economic rebound.
Meanwhile, Trade Minister Lee Chang-yang pointed out the struggles that companies are facing under the economic slowdown.
When considering the decline in chip demand, which takes up about 20% of the country's total exports, export conditions this year are expected to be tough. The situation for investment in equipment and R&D is similar as well. Firms are hesitant about investing due to failing demand, high interest rates, and high inflation.
However, despite the difficulties, firms from 10 major manufacturing sectors like semiconductors, cars, and batteries pledged to make investments this year worth 100 trillion Korean won, or around $82 billion. To help those sectors, Lee said that the government will actively support exporters by providing a record trade financing of 360 trillion won, or around $290 billion. It will also use 2/3 of its annual exports budget in the first half of this year and help domestic firms enter foreign markets. For better investment, it vowed to discover and resolve regulatory issues that hinder corporate investment. It will also provide tax support. He said that during the first half of this year, when economic conditions are expected to be difficult, the government will closely monitor and support exports and corporate investments for a stronger economic recovery in the second half of the year. 신하영, 아리랑 뉴스.
That is all we have for this week's weekly news highlights. Enjoy your weekend.